Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 46th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'd like to talk about humanity's evolution from a global perspective and how different parts of humanity basically are solving different issues for the collective, and also shed some light on what we think is important, what we think is happening, what's really happening. So, when I'm from a developed country. And when you're from the developed country, just the word developed already creates certain connotations, as if value judgments, as if you're superior and somebody else is underdeveloped or in development. And we tend to think of our societies as sort of the leaders um, of our world, leading and then others following in our footsteps. But when you take the perspective of a global organism, well, it doesn't really make sense anymore to think in terms of leaders and followers. You understand that it's a sort of a symbiosis, a symbiotic relationship, and not a hierarchical relationship. So you couldn't say, it would be stupid to say that your stomach leads your liver, or that your heart leads your lungs, or is more developed than your lungs. Each part of your body plays a specific role, a role that is very different, but it's really impossible to sort of think of them in a hierarchy. That is excluded. Of course, you could say that there, at times, certain organs are more important than others, like when you're eating. At a certain point, your mouth and your teeth are very important, then your stomach is important, then your colon is important, then your intestines. And so there's sequences. Sometimes, depending on what's happening, an organ is more important than another, but you understand from a global perspective that that is a shifting and is not a given, and there's no absolutes in terms of importance. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about is this guilt and pride that we basically alternate between when we are from the developed world very often. So some of them are in this pride emotion only, saying, "Oh, look how developed we are. Look at all the other countries, how barbaric they are." And some others are in guilt. That is, "Oh my God, look, we're pillaging and looting the whole world. We are enslaving them in modern slavery. How dare we have so much? How dare we have food on our table while in other places people are starving? That's not fair," and etc. But again, I want to take a higher perspective, which by no means suggests that we shouldn't. It's something to go beyond guilt and pride, basically, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't help um, other other countries or other people or people that are starving or such and such, but just to understand what is really happening at a global level. So the higher perspective is that basically ascension and our evolution is about cleaning, first and foremost, cleaning or cleansing the humanity's collective unconscious. And what does that mean? It means that all of the traumas, all of the hardships that humanity has suffered through all of its life, all of its past, with starting with hunter-gatherers societies, and then becoming like, say here, sedentary farmers, then industrial revolution, at least from our perspective. Um, so you could basically say that the evolution is actually a cycle. It is a state of balance and harmony. Balance and harmony. That is the state that we were in when we were basically apes, or very much linked to the animal world, which is always in balance and harmony. It's impossible for them not to be, because that is the natural state they're in. And sometimes, like certain events come along, like a catastrophe, a flood, or something, and then it naturally goes back to balance and harmony. But it's almost as if the universe said, okay, I'm tired of this circular story. We need something new. And so it creates the human, which is a sort of unbalanced and unharmonious animal, which has to strive towards finding a new balance in its ascended state. Say here, angels, I don't know, as angels or as higher dimensional beings or whatever. Um, so, one question that always comes to mind is, well, we were perfect at some point, and some of these societies that we deem as ideal societies, like primitive, um, we always sort of glorify um, these. Well, primitive is already a bad word, but let's say the original civilizations or old civilizations that built the pyramids and I don't know what, like, and we tend to think that they were in harmony, which they were, with nature, with their surroundings. Some of them even reached a very higher understanding in terms of spirituality. But the possible experience, the diversity of experiences they could have, was limited, and there was no incentive for evolution. Once you reach a state of balance and harmony, and you understand, you sort of reach and touch God and that universal consciousness, and you're connected to that, and you're out of duality, then you are living in this kind of, a cyclical, almost a cyclical paradise. Like if you're in the Garden of Eden, what is your incentive for improving anything? You're in paradise. So they already were in a state of heaven on earth. Heaven on earth. But the experiences they could have in that heaven were limited and were not sort of serving the purpose of the universe, which is to know all that it is, all that it can be, all that it is, and all that it is includes all of the technology, all of the new ideas that we sort of discovered through duality and hardship and being disconnected from source. And this opens up a whole new range of experiences. And so the whole point here is this fall from grace, as you say, when the sort of Adam and Eve are shunned from paradise, and then you go down towards like being disconnected from source, and then you go gradually back, and then there is this cycle of the golden age, which is basically reaping the fruits of all the new ways we can experience paradise through all of the new ideas and concepts and forms um, and ideas that we've sort of had an incentive to discover because we were disconnected from source. Now we reap the benefits of all of those, but only the positive ones. So we get to use all of our technology, but in a way that is not destructive. We get to use all of our knowledge, but in a way that is creative and not destructive. And then again, that reaches its limits, and we fall from grace again in order to unlock even higher states and higher, more complex experiences, because this is what it's all about. It's the universe experiencing itself, and in certain moments, the universe thinks about experiences, and in other moments, the universe wants to experience those. Well, let's just say that the universe cannot um, really. I mean, creating new ideas is one thing. Experiencing new ideas is another thing, and that's where we are. That we are in the world of the experience of all that is, and that requires this process. Because why would you go looking for new experiences, new ideas, if you are connected to the all that is? There's just no point. And you don't feel them, you don't actually have all the feelings and emotions and all of the, you don't live it as intensely as we live it here when we're disconnected from source. But so coming back to the higher topic here of this, what I'm saying is essential evolution is cleaning humanity's collective unconscious. What does that mean? It means that all the traumas, all the problems that we accumulated along the way here in our evolutionary journey have to be sort of cured or healed before we ascend. And it's the same basically as going as a person to the psychologist and healing all of your traumas. And one day you're going to talk about the time where your parents beat you up. Another time you're going to talk about that teacher that put you down. And there's just all of these traumas. And humanity has a lot of traumas there. Humanity has traumas about, for instance, women oppression. Humanity has traumas about survival and fear of lack, of lacking. Humanity has traumas associated to authority. Humanity has a lot of traumas. And basically, every part of humanity, depending on their sort of uniqueness, can take it upon themselves to select a specific trauma to heal. For instance, in our quote unquote developed world, we get to heal, for instance, women oppression. We get to heal things about authority. Why? Because we have reached a state where we have the luxury, so to speak, to think about these problems, to have debates about women's rights or racism or equality and all of the oppression that it's almost as if like the liver was oppressing the stomach, and then somehow you had to heal that kind of relationship to restore balance and harmony. And because we have the luxury to deal with these traumas, we get to do it because we have food on the table. We have you know just so much comfort here that we have the luxury to spend time healing those things. And if you look at, for instance, the happiness index of our societies, we're not necessarily better off than people living in poverty. I mean, the number of people that are on antidepressants, or the people that go to a psychologist because they have relational problems, for instance, relationships, relationships, is huge. The number of people that go to couple therapy, and we can do that here in the quote unquote developed world, because simply speaking, we're in a situation or a position that allows us to address those traumas of humanity, and those and clean those and heal those. Um, Whereas in the developing world, quote unquote again, they have to deal with things like traumas like survival. And so, what I'm saying here is, for instance, because we dealt with survival in the 16th, 17th century, when we had famines, and so we devised sort of a very brutal strategy, which was based on authoritarianism and sort of putting nature, making nature subservient to our needs, and applying this very violent kind of and dictatorial way of subduing nature to our will in order to transcend our fear of survival, and fear of lack, like for instance, not having food on the table and all the famines. We've dealt with it in a very bad way, which now gives the developing world a way to transcend that and develop, like, new ways to overcome that fear with modern techniques like permaculture, rediscovering local organic food, for instance, and completely transforming the agriculture, because, simply speaking, because they start in many cases from nothing, or they don't have a lot to lose. They have much more potential for shifting and trying out different models and different ways of solving this problem that we solved so poorly, simply because it wasn't we were at a level of consciousness here in the industrial revolution which didn't allow us to find a harmonious and balanced solution to our fear of survival. So they're doing that for the collective, simply because they're in the position to do so, and they're not really dealing with relationships that much and all of these topics of rights and stuff, because they don't have food on the table, so they have to discuss. I mean, they have to worry about these things, and there you see how well this works. This mechanism is that each part of humanity is solving or healing parts of the trauma of humanity as a whole, and they cross fertilize each other. So when we are just ruling by example and not trying to impose anything on anyone, our advances, our any advances that we make in terms of women's rights, relationships, making more harmonious relationships with the couples, like stopping intra marriage violence inside couples or things like that, that sort of permeates into the developing world. And as they develop and perfect certain techniques like permaculture and all that stuff via their trial and error, because they have the freedom, and they are not conditioned by the industrial revolution and that kind of model, they can also help some farmers do the transition to more sustainable ways of growing food, more respectful towards nature. And you see this two-way process, basically, where when part of humanity heals and addresses certain cleanses certain traumas in the collective, it trickles down or up or wherever, and helps the entire collective. And it is normally a collaborative process. And the reason why I wanted to do this video is especially um, so that we snap out of this quick judgment of saying that we have it all good. We don't have any reason to complain because we have food on the table, because this and that, we have a job, and because they're poor, they're suffering, they're ill, and they're this and that. Um, and just to say that the higher perspective is that each part of humanity is solving what they can solve from where they are, and nobody has it easy. You can be just as depressed and miserable even though you're living in a mansion and a villa, because your relationships problems are really the worst. And that is because you took it upon yourself to solve that trauma in the collective. Whereas somebody that's really poor on the other side of the world, they're not solving relationships. because they don't have the luxury to even think about those things. It's just about survival. They're like people, man and wife. Sometimes they have very good relationships, of course, don't get me wrong, but in many cases, it's the last thing that you think about is like um, bickering over dishes and things like that, or raising the kids. It's more this kind of relationship where you're like, okay, I'm going to work in the factory for 12 hours and you're gonna walk 20 kilometers to get some water for the kids, and when we get home we just go to bed and that's it. And if you have some strength, then you're trying to improve your situation by trying out these new models of living and survival. And so we have this judgment saying that we have it good and everybody else is have it bad, when in fact nobody has it good and nobody has it bad. It's just everybody is basically handling the healing of a part of the humanity's collective unconscious and all the traumas that are there, depending on what they can do. And that is something that is inevitable. You cannot not live on this planet. You cannot be outside of this because you are part of it. Just like a cell in your body um, cannot not be affected if you're wounded or if something goes wrong. It will be impacted and it cannot escape that reality. And so, of course, here you see again, I have this two-way process. But when we have a process where we're thinking of ourselves as developed and advanced and no reason for us to suffer, and look down upon the developing and sending them help from that kind of vibration or energy with judgment, condescending almost, saying, oh, those poor people, they can't afford food, and you're sending them food, that is not necessarily going to help them that much. If, however, you see it from a higher perspective and let go of judgment and just say that if you're sending food, it's not because they are the poor victims and you're the bad guys and they're the good guys and we're oppressing them, and not, but you're just sending it because you are one cell in that collective, which is just helping out another cell because it can and it wants to, for no other reason, then the opposite is also going to happen. And like I said, it's that kind of process that's happening on an unconscious level, anyways, which means us, by solving relational problems here and women's rights and racism and equality and all those questions that you have the luxury of asking because you have food on the table, inevitably helps the developing world. What's hindering the process is the condescending attitude of trying to forcing it upon them, or thinking of them as underdeveloped. And the same in reverse. If you have, for instance, judgments over our industrial revolution and the way that we deal with nature, and in sensing glorifying the way that um, the permaculture and all that, this return to nature, um, then you're in the wrong kind of energy. You don't see it from the evolutionary perspective where there isn't good or bad. It's just some things happened, trauma happened, like you were slapped by your parents. Okay, it happened, and you just have to grow past that and heal that. And it's not by fighting against your past that it's going to be healed. It's by accepting and moving forward and transcending it. And so you can see that at a subconscious level, it's already happening. We're already cross-fertilizing, but it's even better and goes even quicker when it's brought forth in and to the conscious level, because then you can advance much quicker and you don't have all this resistance, because sometimes the conscious level can get in the way via, for instance, judgment, which can slow down this process of healing because you create trauma on top of the existing trauma. So I hope this was interesting. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and see you in the next video.